The governor is calling on refiners to rein in their profits or face penalties for price gouging. He called state lawmakers into a special session today, asking them to set a cap on those profits and determine what refiners would have to pay for going over.
His plan would return excess profits as tax refunds, but refiners tell reporter Rick Montana's excessive state regulation is what got California to this point in the first place.
It's been rough. We have two SUVs, one for my wife and one for myself. So filling up both of them has been, plus $100 each.
Governor Gavin Newsom is starting a special session to establish a profit cap on the oil industry. Consumer Watchdog pushed the governor's office for this plan.
If we put this windfall profits cap on them, they won't be able to raise the price of gas if they don't have the justification and cost.
The Western States Petroleum Association represents the big five oil companies in front of the state. It says the high prices are not a result of greed or gouging, but a legislative problem.
The costs we see in California are about our market conditions, public policy, and the high cost of doing business in California. All things that the government, the legislature, the governor can take a look at.
And despite WSPA blaming public policy, Newsom says these records were set over price gouging, and some drivers agree.
You look at them making record profits, and you just have to feel that way.
That was crazy. I had never experienced that big of a jump. So I definitely feel like somebody's taking my money and running away with it.
We are joined now by Professor Severin Borenstein with UC Berkeley's Energy Institute at Haas. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. The special session is debating the merits of this windfall tax. Supporters argue it would help discourage oil companies from unwarranted price hikes. But what kind of impact do you see this really having?
Well, I think it probably would not have a big impact one way or the other on prices. I think it's unlikely to prevent the price of gasoline from going up when we actually do have these sorts of shortages. But on the other hand, it's also unlikely to lower it. I think that the main effect would be to claw back some of those profits they make. And even if they're not doing anything to make the market tighter, when we do have some sort of outage because California is a gasoline island, the price goes way up. And what this would do would claw back some of those profits and use it to go to consumers so they could afford the gasoline more easily.
You know, big oil is an easy target to blame in all this, but California also doesn't make it easy. They're facing a lot of regulations to operate in the state. So how does that factor into driving up the cost of gas?
Well, it does drive up the price of gas. We see that in the cost of the cap and trade program, in some of the other regulations. But even when you factor in the higher taxes and the costs of all the environmental regulations, some of which have done a lot to improve the air quality in California, you still see an extra premium above that in California prices. And so there is something else going on in California's market that I don't think we really understand yet. And I think one of the exciting parts of what the governor introduced is not just this windfall profits cap, but also the piece of it that would collect a lot more information on how refineries operate in California and how they deal with their retail outlets. That would give us a more transparency about how the market's actually working and whether it is working effectively, and maybe what's causing these prices to be so high.
You mentioned air quality, and as California tries to transition from fossil fuels to a clean energy economy, are higher prices just going to be part of the reality that we're dealing with?
Well, they are if we don't do something to understand the market better, because we are almost certainly going to gradually lose some of these refineries as we use less and less gasoline. And when we have fewer refineries, if any one of them has a disruption, it'll be a bigger problem. And it will just be a more concentrated market where there's more opportunity for the refiners to jack up prices. So I think we really need to get ahead of this problem before we start phasing out gasoline and understand why the market is operating as it is and why we've seen such high prices, particularly since 2015. Since that Torrance refinery outage, we've seen a consistent extra premium of 30 or 40 cents a gallon, which in total has cost California consumers over $40 billion.
Yeah, and the change is coming to more clean energy and more energy efficient cars. All right, Severin Borenstein, thank you so much for joining us.